Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into the story of a band that quite literally built the secret foundation of modern British rock. Now, if you think you've already got the complete history of 1960s rock and roll totally figured out, well, you might just want to stick around because this is probably going to shift your entire perspective. So, let's get into it. Who really invented Britpop? When we think of British rock royalty, our brains naturally jump straight to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, or the Who, right? But there's this massive missing link. A band of four young East London kids who forged a sound and an attitude that would echo through the next several decades. To really grasp their staggering importance, just look at the absolute titans of music who cite them as a core influence. You've got Paul Weller from The Jam, 90s Britpop icons like Blur and Oasis, straight through to the Sex Pistols, even Led Zeppelin's Robert Plant. In fact, Plant actually modeled aspects of his iconic, rasping vocal style directly from them. So how on earth did one single band inspire such a wildly diverse group of musical legends? Section 1. Defining the mod aesthetic. Now, the name Small Faces is actually pretty brilliant when you know the backstory. Back in the 60s, a face was basically the ultimate compliment in London. It was a slang term for a sharply dressed, highly respected mod. They just added small because Steve Marriott, Ronnie Lane, Kenny Jones, and Ian Mallaghan were all, under 5'5". But despite their small physical stature, their cultural footprint was an absolute giant. Because these guys didn't just play music for the mods, they literally were the mods. Picture this: slim-fitting, three-button tailored suits, crazy bold paisley patterns, and riding around on those classic Italian motor scooters decked out in mirrors. They weren't some manufactured pop group assembled in a boardroom to cash in on a trend. No, they were genuine, working-class kids shopping at Carnaby Street boutiques, and they established a sharp, rebellious look that completely defined 1960s cool. Section 2. Evolving the British sound. What's absolutely fascinating is how fast they evolved. Over at Decca Records, they were heavily marketed as this, silly pop group for teenage girls. They were just rushed in and out of the studio to churn out quick R&B hits like All or Nothing. But when they broke away and signed with Immediate Records, total game changer, they transformed into these highly experimental, psychedelic pioneers. On their massive hit, Ichiko Park, they were actually one of the very first pop bands ever to pioneer the use of studio flanging, that sweeping, whooshing sound effect on the drums. They were just constantly pushing boundaries. And all of this experimentation culminated in their 1968 masterpiece, Ogdens' Nut Gone Flake. This was a #1 psychedelic concept album, and it was revolutionary. First off, it wasn't packaged in a normal square sleeve, but in a round, metal replica of a giant tobacco tin. And the music? Side 1 was this incredibly tight, unforgettable rock. Side 2, though, was a surreal fairy tale narrated in a corrupted, whimsical, almost nonsensical English by comedian Stanley Unwin. It was brilliantly weird, deeply British, and just miles ahead of its time. Section 3. Exploitation and fracture. 20 pounds. Honestly, this number just hits you right in the gut. That is the exact weekly wage their ruthless manager, Don Arden, paid them. Let that sink in for a second. We're talking about a band generating massive, chart-topping hit records, touring constantly, acting as the literal face of a generation, and they were kept on a pocket money allowance of 20 pounds a week. Drummer Kenny Jones kind of hit the nail on the head when he looked back on this. He said they were young, naive, and had absolutely no idea about recording contracts. They were just four young blokes that wanted to play music. And man, they were completely exploited. Instead of actual royalties, management gave them accounts at Carnaby Street clothing boutiques. They wouldn't even see the true royalties they were owed until the late 1990s, after long court battles, and tragically, after 2 of the founding members had already passed away. But the brutal financial exploitation was just one piece of the puzzle. They were facing hurdles everywhere. For instance, keyboardist Ian Mallaghan had a minor drug conviction, which led to visa issues that completely locked them out of doing lucrative U.S. tours. That's a massive reason they never really broke America. Then, you throw in intense internal conflicts. Lead singer Steve Marriott was suffering from what his bandmates called lead singer syndrome. He was incredibly frustrated that nobody was taking them seriously as heavy musicians. This whole thing finally boiled over when their label released a track called Lazy Sunday, which was just a prank song Marriott sang in a thick, jokey Cockney accent without their permission. It became a huge smash hit, but for Marriott, it just cemented them as a novelty pop act, which he absolutely hated. When you track their timeline from start to finish, it is staggering how compressed it all was. Formed in '65 in East London, cracking the US charts by '67, releasing their absolute creative masterpiece in '68, and completely falling apart by '69 when Steve Marriott abruptly quit the band live on stage during a New Year's gig. I mean, they burned brightly and they burned out incredibly fast. Just 4 years to change music forever. So what happens after that explosive split on stage? Well, the band fractures. Marriott runs off to chase that heavier blues rock sound he'd been craving, forming Humble Pie with Peter Frampton. Meanwhile, the remaining trio, Kenny, Ronnie, and Ian, they refused to throw in the towel. They successfully reinvented the whole shebang by recruiting 2 future global superstars, singer Rod Stewart and guitarist Ronnie Wood. And since Stewart and Wood were actually pretty tall, the band just dropped the word small from their name and became the legendary 1970s rock band Faces. Section 4. The Ultimate Rock Blueprint. Check this out. The Sex Pistols, the absolute ground zero pioneers of the late 70s punk movement, they famously covered the Small Faces' very first single, What You Gonna Do About It. They tweaked the lyrics a bit to fit their aggressive punk vibe, but the core song was 100% Small Faces. Their influence completely bridged genres, proving that their raw, authentic, working-class energy resonated just as deeply with anti-establishment punks as it did with the 90s Britpop stars who emulated their every melody and style choice. At the band's 2012 induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Steven Van Zandt summed it up perfectly. He said that for a bunch of guys who never took themselves too seriously, they made some of the most soulful, beautiful music anyone's ever made. Despite being exploited, despite their super short lifespan, and their cheeky public persona, they crafted truly timeless art. So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Think about the music you listen to today. From the pure aggression of punk to the swagger of Britpop. What would all of it sound like if these 4 young East London kids hadn't paved the way? While they might not have lasted for decades, and they certainly didn't get the global fame or the paycheck they deserved, the Small Faces were the undeniable spark that lit the fire for generations of music to come. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep learning.